Yesterday morning, Marco Rubio walked into the Apostolic Palace in Rome, sat down with the Pope Leo, and stayed for 2.5 hours. 45 minutes of that was the Pope alone. They smiled, they exchanged gifts, and the Pope was so deep in the conversation that he ran 40 minutes late for his next meeting, and he had to apologize to the staff for keeping them waiting. But if you have been following the news for the past 2 months, that scene should make zero sense. Because as recently as 48 hours before Rubio's plane landed in Rome, the President of the United States was on a radio show calling the Pope dangerous, accusing him of wanting Iran to have a nuclear weapon. So the relationship between the White House and the Vatican is at the lowest point we have seen in decades. So why did Rubio go? And what's interesting to me is this: nobody actually made him go. Trump didn't soften. The Pope didn't apologize. The political pressure that supposedly forced this meeting was real, but it was not the kind of pressure most commentary is describing. So let me walk you through what I think is actually going on, because I think there's a chess move here that almost no one is naming correctly. So let's rewind. Pope Leo, born in Chicago, elected last May, the first American Pope in 2,000 years of Catholic Church history. White Sox fan, soft-spoken theologian, reputation when he was elected, a quiet diplomat. So we go to January 9th of this year. The Pope gives his annual address to the diplomatic corps gathered at the Vatican, and he says something that sounds like a sermon but lands like a warning. He says, and I'm summarizing here, that a diplomacy based on dialogue is being replaced by a diplomacy based on force. That the principle established after the Second World War, the one that says nations should not violate each other's borders, has been completely undermined. He does not name the United States, but he doesn't have to. So we jump to January 22nd, 2 weeks later. Cardinal Christophe Pierre, the Pope's ambassador to Washington, gets summoned to the Pentagon. Saying that sentence out loud sounds strange, but bear with me with this. Diplomats summon other diplomats to embassies, to the State Department. They do not get called into the Pentagon. The meeting reportedly went sideways. According to the Free Press, Pentagon officials told the Vatican that the United States military has the power to do whatever it wants in the world. Allegedly, there are conflicting reports about this. But the Catholic Church had better pick a side. One U.S. official is reported to have invoked the Avignon papacy, which I had to look up. And the moment I look up, I understood why the Vatican took it the way they took it. The Avignon papacy is what happened when the King of France, in the early 1300s, used military force to capture the Pope and move him to France for 70 years. That is the historical analogy that allegedly got dropped on the table. So the Pentagon and the White House denied this. The Vatican denied it on the record, but privately, a Vatican source told CNN that the meeting was unprecedented and tense. Then comes February. The United States, alongside Israel, launches a war against Iran. The Pope responds. He says, God does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war. So when Trump posts on Truth Social that an entire civilization will die tonight if Iran does not capitulate, the Pope calls that statement, in his own words, truly unacceptable. Everyone else knew that was peak Trump. But that is when Trump goes public. He starts calling the Pope weak on crime, terrible for foreign policy, tells him to get his act together and stop being a politician. The Vatican announces there will be no papal visit to the United States in 2026, officially because of the midterms, practically because the relationship is broken. So 48 hours before Rubio gets on a plane for Rome, the President of the United States goes on Hugh Hewitt's radio show and accuses the Pope again of endangering Catholics by being soft on Iran's nuclear program. That is the room Rubio walked into yesterday. I want to push back on something I have been hearing in commentary about this meeting. The framing has been Trump bashed the Pope, his support among Catholics tanked, and he had to send Rubio to fix it. That is not exactly what the data shows, and the real data is more interesting. In February and March, when this fight was at its most public, Fox News polling showed Trump's approval among Catholics holding up better than his approval nationally. In the late February poll, Catholics were a net positive for him. Everyone expected the feud to crash his support with the most religious voting bloc in America. But it did not. Well, not at first. Catholic voters proved more elastic than anyone in either party predicted. Then April happened. A Washington Post ABC Ipsos poll from late April, Trump's approval among all Catholics, 38%. Among white Catholics specifically, the demographic that gave him a more than 20-point margin in the 2024 election, his approval dropped from 63% in February of last year to 49%. 14 points in roughly 15 months, with most of the bleeding happening since the Pope feud went hard. Reuters Ipsos poll the same week, Pope Leo's approval in America, 60%. Trump's approval, 36%. The Pope is at this moment more popular with the American public than the American president is, according to some polls. But you know that the polls, you have to take them with a grain of salt. But anyway, that is a trigger. Not the early polls which held, the late April polls which started to crack. White Catholics in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, the Rust Belt, the states that put Trump back in the White House 6 months before midterms. That is the room Rubio walked into. And here's what makes this interesting. Rubio, before he got on the plane, gave a press briefing where he was asked directly whether he was going to Rome to smooth things over with the Pope. Yeah, you guessed that right. Rubio denied it. He said the trip was pre-planned. He said other secretaries of state have done this. He said it would be normal for them to engage with the Vatican. He said that this was about religious freedom and humanitarian aid in Cuba. Oh, we need things in Cuba to start happening. But well, I digress. That public denial, the denial that he was there to fix anything, is the first move of the chess game, because Rubio cannot show up looking like he is begging. The President of the United States is publicly attacking the Pope. The Secretary of State cannot then publicly arrive saying, "I'm sorry, please don't be mad." So he frames it as routine. Religious freedom. Cuba. Things they have discussed before, by the way. So he brings his wife, Janet. He greets the Pope formally. Mr. Secretary, Holy Father, he brings a gift, a small crystal football, and he jokes that he knows the Pope is a baseball guy because of the White Sox. That is not an accident. That is a Cuban-American Catholic from Florida who knows how to enter a room. I am a big fan of Marco Rubio, by the way. It's something I have to disclose. Well, the Pope gives him a small pen made from olive wood. Olive, of course, the plant of peace. The Daily Beast wrote a piece calling that gift a humiliation. To me, that sounds like a misread. The gift is a public-facing message. Please go home and tell your boss to stop. It is a message wrapped in a piece of wood. Nobody got humiliated. Everybody got understood. And they sit down 45 minutes alone with the Pope. Then another hour and 45 minutes with Cardinal Parolin, the Vatican's own Secretary of State, the man who told reporters this week that Trump's attacks on the Pope, and I am quoting Parolin here, seemed to him a bit strange. The 45 minutes with the Pope is the picture. The 2 hours with Parolin is the actual substance. So why is this a chess move and not a retreat? Well, we have 3 layers. Let me give you all 3, because The first one is what most people see, and the third one, the deeper one, is what almost no one is naming. Layer 1. Trump did not soften. 48 hours before Rubio's meeting, Trump was on the radio attacking the Pope. 48 hours after the meeting, Trump has not retracted a single word. He's still in the bad cop position. Rubio is in the good cop position. The most senior practicing Catholic in the administration spent 2.5 hours at the Apostolic Palace with the Pope. The president spent the same week calling the Pope dangerous. That looks like a contradiction, I understand. But the reality is the opposite. It is a coordinated structure. Catholic voters who started peeling away in late April get a permission structure. They get to keep both. They get to nod at Trump's fight against what he sees as a Pope soft on Iran's nuclear program, and they get to see their church respected by an administration that brings its highest-ranking Catholic to sit attentively and respectfully in the Pope's library. They don't have to choose. The administration is speaking to them in two voices, and both voices are saying, "We see you." And layer 2, I was coming to this. Cuba. This is the piece that is barely getting any coverage. That is the piece I find most strategically interesting. Rubio, before the meeting, told reporters that one of the topics on his agenda was humanitarian aid distribution in Cuba through the Catholic Church. Hurricane Melissa hit Cuba late last year. The United States has already allocated $9 million in aid. The Cuban regime, predictable, is trying to control how that aid gets distributed, which means a chunk of it would never reach Cuban families. You know how it is. Rubio's proposal is to bypass the regime entirely and use the Catholic Church, specifically Caritas Cuba, as the exclusive distribution channel. Now, think about what that requires. It requires the Vatican to formally cooperate with the United States State Department on a humanitarian operation that is structurally a political end run around the Cuban regime. But that is not something the Vatican signs onto if it's at war with Washington. That is something the Vatican signs onto if it has been treated with respect by Washington. So Rubio needs that channel. He needs it for Cuba, the country his family fled. He needs it as a Cuban-American Secretary of State whose entire political identity is built around that island. So a big piece of this meeting is not actually about the Pope-Trump feud at all. A big piece of this meeting is about Cuba, with the Pope-Trump feud as the weather. So Rubio knows he cannot get the Cuba channel if the Vatican feels disrespected. So he goes in person with his wife with humility and he asks. And the Pope ran 40 minutes late for his next meeting because, that conversation was going nice, was substantive. So the third layer, the framing flip on Iran. Rubio, in his briefing, defended Trump's claim that the Pope is endangering Catholics. He said the president's logic is this: a nuclear Iran would be used against places that have a lot of Catholics and Christians. So, protecting Catholics in the administration's framing is precisely what justifies the war the Pope is criticizing. That flip matters, and we have to remember that the Pope did not mention or address the United States in particular. We have to be fair. But this reframes the entire fight from Trump versus the Pope on whether war is moral to Trump versus the Pope on who actually keeps Catholics safe. That is a much harder argument for the Vatican to win in front of an American Catholic audience, and it gives Rubio a defensible posture to walk into Rome with. He is not there as a man apologizing for his boss. He is there as a Catholic, explaining why his boss is also fighting for Catholics, just in a different theater. So the chess move, the secret sauce is this. Rubio went to Rome not to apologize, not to walk anything back, but to open a back channel that the Vatican prefers anyway. The Holy See has always favored behind-the-scenes diplomacy over public communication. by going privately, by talking quietly, by sitting with paddling for nearly 2 hours, Rubio gave the Vatican what they actually wanted. The president's public attacks remain in place because that is the public posture. The diplomatic substance moves underground because that is the actual work. Catholic voters who were starting to peel away get a signal from the most senior Catholic in the administration that the church is being respected. And Rubio quietly puts the Cuba channel back on the table. Yeah, it's classic. Good cop, bad cop, played on a global stage with the world's oldest diplomatic institution as the audience and the entire midterm electorate watching the picture. The Pope didn't get humiliated. Trump didn't get humiliated. Rubio came home with what he came for. So this is the kind of move that does not look like a move while it is happening because the news cycle is busy covering the fight and not the choreography. 6 months from now, when the Cuba aid pipeline is running through Caritas and white Catholic numbers in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin start taking back up, the people who watched the picture will remember Rubio walked into Rome, smiled, accepted an olive wood pen, and walked out 2.5 hours later having put a piece on the board that almost nobody else was looking at. That is the secret sauce. He went to ask, not to apologize. And I remind you that I have a channel dedicated to geopolitics, international markets, and the current AI race for compute supremacy, the Power Pundit. Check the link in the description of this video. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the Bottle Language Guy. Much love and bliss.